Hi everyone. I hope you all are fine from this COVID-19 thing which is going on everywhere in the world. So I'm here to teach you all a very basic introduction of securities law, which is, as I am told, a part of your law and economics syllabus. It would I would not dwell much on the technicalities of the law. I'll just give you all a very basic introduction on how this entire security law works. And before we begin, about me, my name is Tamjeed Ahmad. I am a lawyer working in the law firm in New Delhi. I hold a master's in air and space law from Leiden. So, although I'm an aviation lawyer, but my work mainly consists of financial laws and banking laws dealing with aviation transactions. So, before we begin, or before as we go on, the topic is securities law. So, but before we move on to securities law, what is meant by security? Security, in a very broad term, means any kind of beneficial ownership or interest in a corporation. Say, for example, if somebody has any kind of ownership, now, kinds of ownership will come later. In any corporation, that corporation can be a public corporation, it can be a private corporation. The collective term used broadly for that ownership or for that interest in that company or in that corporation is called securities. And the law which governs this security, or the law which governs the transactions that happen concerning the securities, is the securities law. Now, why do we need securities? So before we go on to that point, since the topic of this, or since the main subject is law and economics, we need to understand basically how does the economy works. So an economy consists of many kinds of markets. It can be a financial market, it can be a capital market, it can be any kind of market. So an economy functions in a market. Now, in a market, there are systems. There's a banking system, there's a currency system, and there's a financial system. Now, for a company or for a corporation, when they want to raise money, how can they raise money? The most easy way out is that you go to a bank or an NBFC. NBFC is non-banking financial company, and you ask for a loan, and they'll give you a loan on certain kind of interest rate. That loan you have to repay back. This is the traditional form of money lending or financing. You approach a bank or you approach any lender. The borrower approaches a lender, and that lender gives you or gives the company or gives the borrower that amount of money on a certain kind of interest. But this, in a real sense, in a healthy financial system, the borrowing should not always be from a lender. The borrowing should not be 100% from banks. The borrowing should be diversified. One of those diversification is investing your own money, which we are not going to discuss as of now. Other important is taking the money from the market. That is, you go to the market, you sell your ownership, you sell your shares, you sell your stocks, and in lieu of which you get finance, you get money. So that is, you raise money from the market. And that is known as what? That is basically known as a capital market. Now, securities market is also a part of a capital market, right? Now, this market, when you raise money from market, there are people who are buying your shares, who are buying your debentures, your stocks. Now, when somebody buys a stock or a share or anything for that matter, If tomorrow you're going to buy an iPhone from an Apple store or a Samsung mobile from Samsung store, you buy because you know one thing, that if tomorrow something goes south, there's a law in this country, there's a regulator in this country which will make sure that I as a consumer is protected and my consumer interest in the property is protected by the state. So similarly, for a person who is investing in securities market, who is buying something from a securities market, it is very important for him or her to be well aware and to be satisfied that the laws of the country are there to protect him if something goes bad, are there to guide him or her when something goes bad. There's a regulator to regulate the market, and that is the work of a securities market regulator. Now, securities market regulator in India is the Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI. So SEBI has three basic functions. The first function is protecting the interest of investor. So if you have invested some money in a corporation in the securities market, it's SEBI's mandate, legal mandate, to protect your interest. Second is to develop the securities market. And third is to regulate the market. Now, securities market can basically be of two types. It can be a primary market, it can be a secondary market. Now, I'm sure you all know what is a demat account, or you all know what is Bombay Stock Exchange, or National Stock Exchange, or the New York Stock Exchange, or the Shanghai Stock Exchange. They are intermediaries. They are intermediaries between the buyer, who can be you, who can be me, who can be anybody, and the seller. The seller can be, it's a listed company, or a company who is selling its shares or its stock or securities, right? So a market can be of two types. It can be a primary market, it can be secondary market. So first I'll let you know what is meant by primary market. In a primary market is where a company or a corporation sells its product, that is securities, its ownership, its interest in the company for the first time. Now, it can be either through IPO. I'm sure you know what's IPO. IPO is an initial public offering. When for the first time a company goes public, it's an IPO. It can also be by a preferential allotment of shares. That is when the shares of the company are allotted to a preferred or set of people or investors. It can also be by private placement, when you invite a classified or qualified group of investors to buy your shares. But what is the basic difference between primary market and secondary market is, in primary market, the transaction only happens once. An IPO can only come for one time. It's an initial offering. Now, once those products have been sold at the primary market, they cannot be resold or rebargained at the primary market, in the primary market. Then it goes to the secondary market. So what is secondary market? Secondary market is something where you can sell or buy shares automatically. And you can sell or buy shares at any point of time when the market is open. For example, a stock market. A stock market is a kind of a secondary market. In a stock market, you can sell your share whenever you want. You can buy the shares which are available whenever you want. So in a secondary market, there is no limit on transactions in principle. In a primary market, the transaction cannot happen more than once. That's a very basic difference between primary market and secondary market. Now, once a security has been sold, what is the importance of the security? See, because the topic of your class is law and economics, you need to also understand the relation or inter-se relation between securities and financial markets. Now, if everybody, I'm sure we all know about Vijay Mallya's case. Now, in Vijay Mallya's case, the money which he took was from bank, right? And he defaulted on that money. And that causes a double account book problem. What is a double account book problem? When bank lends you money and you are unable to repay the amount of money which you have taken from bank to the bank classifies you as a non-performing asset. And the bank goes in sort of a loss. Now, when the bank is not making money, it cannot further lend money to somebody else. Now, because the bank cannot further lend money to somebody else, it causes a stagnation in the economy. How that happens? There's a company Y which cannot raise money from the market, because raising money from the market also requires a kind of compliances to be followed. But they want to go to a bank. They have an idea which is totally workable, which is an excellent idea. But because the people who went before this company to the bank have not repaid their loans, or have defaulted, or have now become a non-performing asset, because of which the bank is now in troubles, the bank won't be able to help that person, and an entrepreneur dies, or his idea dies, or her idea dies. Therefore, it's also important that the finance or the industry of the country should have a decent exposure in securities market also. If the economy is only dependent on banks, or if the economy is only dependent on lenders, then this won't work. And that is the reason we have securities market. In securities market, you are betting something. It can enhance your savings. You buy a share, for example, Yes Bank. Now, Yes Bank went into loss, right? And we all know it was placed under moratorium by the RBI under Section 45 of the Banking Regulations Act. Now, in Yes Bank's case, the money which it had borrowed was of investors, not of the bank. That is, it was in the securities market. The shares and the debentures of the Yes Bank, or the stocks of Yes Bank, were in the securities market, and they plummeted. That does not cause a double account book problem for any other bank, because no other bank had a lending exposure to Yes Bank. Obviously, when a bank goes to moratorium, it has more exposure, but I'm trying to give you a very simple statement that why securities market is important. What I mean to say is that the money which was lost in the stock market. And that was a bet, because securities market works on the fundamental principle of emotions. If the market is bearish, it will result in loss. If the market is bullish, it will result in profit. So generally, a securities market goes through a bearish trend, it goes through a bullish trend. When a market goes through a bearish trend, it goes into profit. When the market goes through when a market goes through a bearish trend, it goes into loss. When a market goes into a bullish trend, it goes into profit. Now, how are securities issued? In issuance of security, we have two primary players: the issuer and the intermediary. I'll give you a recent example. There is this company which I'm sure most of you must have heard, known as IRCTC, Indian Railway Catering and Tourism Corporation. Now, it is one of the most well-performing companies, public sector companies of the government. Recently, this company went public. That is, it went for an IPO. Now, when it went for an IPO, that was its primary market, in securities market. Now, once that IPO comes into being, and that shares are now freely tradable over the stock market, that because IPO is not allotted to everybody. You have to qualify, or you're selected. So that was a primary market, and everybody was willing to purchase the IPO of IRCTC, because if I'm not wrong, the IPO was launched at somewhere around 400 or 500 rupees, and it went up to 2300 rupees. So if somebody got 10 stocks in that company for around 4000 rupees, it was worth at one point of time of 23,000 rupees. So when it comes into an IPO, for the first time, that's a primary market. And here the important player was the issuer, and that is the company itself. Now, once those shares or those stocks are easily available and freely tradable in the market, then that goes to stock market. That is another important player of securities market, Bombay Stock Exchange or NSE. Now here you can buy securities at one click because they're easily and freely available. So the two most important players in a securities market are issuer, intermediary, and also the investor. So these three people make up the securities market of a country. And that is a very basic idea which I have given you of securities market in India. Now, since I have been told that the audience in this class consists primarily of students of B.A.L.B second year, so I have tried my best to not bombard you all with some kind of, I must say, technical legal glitches which we face in securities market or in capital markets. I've tried to maintain and tried to teach you all a very simple but the basic idea of what is securities market and how does it functions. So the key takeaways for you all is what is meant by securities market. What is a security? Any kind of a beneficial ownership or interest in a corporation is a security. It can be debenture, it can be stock, it can be share, it can be any kind of ownership or a beneficial interest in a corporation is a security. And a market, what is a market? Where you buy and sell things. So a market where you can buy or sell such beneficial ownerships or such interest in a corporation which are collectively known as securities is known as a securities market. That's a very basic premise on which this all works. And the regulator for this country is SEBI, that is a Securities and Exchange Board of India. It's a quasi-judicial body sort of thing. And the entire management of securities market in India is done by SEBI. So I guess, yeah, at your level, that's the basic thing which you need to know. What is the securities? What is security? What is security market? Who is a regulator in securities market? Why securities market is important for us? Because we don't want the market of our country, we don't want the entrepreneur of this country or the companies of this country to have exposure only to banks. We want them to be diversified in their exposure for finances, right? That's a very basic idea. And if you have any other questions, please, you will have my email from your concerned teacher, Ms. Siddiqui. And please shoot me an email if you have any if you have any questions to ask, not only on securities law and on financial laws, banking law, aviation law for that matter, because that's my core area of my practice. And I'll be more than happy to reply to you all and to assist you all. So I wish you all best of luck. But do ponder over this thought. In the present scenario in India which we have, banks are not able to lend money to people. And there's a liquidity crunch in the market. Why it's all the more important to invest or to develop our securities market. And why it's much more important, and not only securities market is important, it's also very important for the people to have trust in the market. Because without trust, nobody is going to invest in securities market. And how that trust can be created and how that trust is related to economics, an economic function of a market. And it is here where the role of regulator or the role of the law or the role of the state comes into picture in maintaining that trust or in developing that trust. So please ponder over this, and for any other questions, please don't hesitate in contacting me. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.